doing shout outs. Let me know if you want me to shout you out. Put your name in the comments. Write your name in the comments if you want me to shout you out. Hello, I'm doing shout outs. If you want me to shout you out, write your name in the comments. Shout out to Amna. Hi Astro. Hi Arya. Shout out to Callie. Shout out to Annie. Shout out to Gaia. Shout out to Lotta. Shout out to Amna. Shout out to Sanaya. Shout out to Riley. Shout out to Bobby. Shout out to Davey. Shout out to Darissa. Shout out to Max. Shout out to Selena. Shout out to Luna. Shout out to Issa. Shout out to Vit. Shout out to Mads. Shout out to Avery. Shout out to Mo. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Rose. Shout out to Insaf. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for your support. Shout out to V. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Lucy. Shout out to Evelyn. Shout out to Paloma. Shout out to Tiger. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Daniela. Shout out to Taylor. Shout out to Emma. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Avery. Shout out to Jojo. Shout out to Kemi. Shout out to Willow. Shout out to Aliva. Shout out to Beren. Shout out to Chance. Shout out to Noah. Shout out to Maria. Shout out to Kiara. Shout out to Braylon. Shout out to Angel. And shout out to Madeline. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. If you want me to shout you out, leave your name in the comments. Shout out to Elise. Shout out to Annabella. Shout out to Victoria. Shout out to Evie. Shout out to Kaylee. Shout out to Farah. Shout out to Alina. Shout out to Kenzie. Shout out to Cozy. Shout out to Minu. Shout out to Haley. Shout out to Reed. Shout out to Idva. Shout out to Eric. Shout out to Sulaiman. Shout out to Livy. Shout out to Sarah. Shout out to Angie. Shout out to Rumi. Shout out to Shadow. Shout out to Alero. Shout out to Hiba. Shout out to Ivy. Shout out to Gadea. Shout out to Bailey. Shout out to Muskan. Shout out to Lucy. Shout out to Anna. Shout out to Jordan. Shout out to Phoebe. Shout out to Shiloh. Shout out to Danijela. Shout out to Bethel. Shout out to Addie. Shout out to Lavinia. Shout out to Tessa. Shout out to Amber. Oh wait, hold on, this doesn't work. Shout out to Amber. Shout out to Cass. Shout out to Zoe. Shout out to Maya. Shout out to Sienna. Shout out to Dolly. Okay, shout out to these people. Also leave a like if you like the shout outs. On to the next page. Thank you for being here. If you want a shout out, write your name in the chat. Shout out to Aaliyah. Shout out to Joseph. Shout out to Venus. Shout out to Samar. Shout out to Timmy. Shout out to Naomi. Shout out to Dixie. Shout out to Layla. Shout out to Ariel. Shout out to Nevea. Shout out to Blair. Shout out to Aaliyah. Shout out to Carly. Shout out to Sophie. Shout out to Shannon. Shout out to Ashley. Shout out to Mila. Shout out to Dreamy. Shout out to Ariana. Shout out to Paisley. Shout out to Milo or Milo. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Ava. Shout out to Israt. Shout out to Tinley. Shout out to Milagro. Shout out to Sarah. Shout out to Brooklyn. Shout out to Jay. Shout out to Jaslyn. Shout out to Evelyn. Shout out to Laura. Shout out to David. Shout out to Piggy. Shout out to Abby. Shout out to Isadora. Shout out to Arvin. Shout out to Taija. Shout out to Acel. Shout out to Naja. Shout out to Lily. Shout out to Amina. Shout out to Aliyah. Shout out to these people. If you want to shout out, leave your name in the comments. On to the next page. Also leave a like if you like these shout outs. Leave a like. Shout out to Surrey. Shout out to Ella. Shout out, oh, the names go by fast. Shout out to Lisa. Shout out to Alana. Shout out to Emily. Shout out to Zara. Shout out to Afi. Shout out to Kaylee. Calais. Shout out to Kay Ripple. Shout out to Artemis. Shout out to Shirley. Shout out to Jasmine. Shout out to Yasmin. Shout out to Nathan. Shout out to Amy. Shout out to Antonia. Shout out to Artrus. Shout out to Riley. Shout out to Ramin. Shout out to Piper. Shout out to Ali. Shout out to Savannah. Shout out to Liam. Shout out to Brooke. Shout out to Momina. Shout out to Vera. Shout out to Ayla. Shout out to Mia. Shout out to I missed it. Sheeta. Shout out to Jaffer. Shout out to Sean. Shout out to Naren. Shout out to Kensley. Shout out to Zane. Shout out to Chloe. Shout out to Sarah. Shout out to Nolan. Shout out to Zoel. Excuse me. Shout out to Gabriella. Shout out to Rana. Shout out to Adonis. Shout out to Mira. Shout out to Hannah. Shout out to Camila. So shout out to these people. Okay, on to the next. Leave your name in the comments if you want me to shout you out. Thank you for being here. Shout out to Dennis. Shout out to Zoe. Shout out to Louise. Shout out to Noelle. Shout out to Darren. Shout out to Laura. Shout out to Giselle. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Shifa. Shout out to London. Shout out to Scarlett. Shout out to Emily. Shout out to Althea. Shout out to Logan. Shout out to Freya. Shout out to Bella. Shout out to Amelia. Shout out to Inez. Shout out to Sahar. Shout out to Layla. Shout out to Zachary. Shout out to Mino. Shout out to Luke. Shout out to Alice. Shout out to Malixa. Shout out to Leanne. Shout out to Journey. Shout out to Sanara. Shout out to Dashi. Shout out to Brenna. Shout out to Puggy. Shout out to Amber and Jet. Shout out to Arnold. Shout out to Carmen. Shout out to Kaylee. Shout out to Mary. Shout out to Sidra. Shout out to Vera. Shout out to Emily. Thank you for subscribing. If I haven't gotten to your name, please write your name again. Shout out to Hala. Shout out to Georgiana. Shout out to Armani. Okay, shout out to these people. Give it a like if you like these shout outs. On to the next page. If I haven't gotten to your name, write your name again. Thank you for being here. Shout out to Macy. Shout out to Sarah. Shout out to Slade. Shout out to Valeria. Shout out to Nina. Shout out to Julie. Shout out to Esal. Oh no, I think I spelled it wrong. Can you write your name again? Shout out to Zainab. Shout out to Andrea. Shout out to Hasna. Thank you for subscribing. Hasna. Shout out to Troy. Shout out to Raquel. Or Rachel, sorry. Shout out to Monse. Shout out to Artem. Shout out to Felix. Shout out to Levi. Shout out to Agatha. Shout out to Sarah. Shout out to Elisa. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Sawyer. Shout out to Kenna. Shout out to Ellie. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Moonlight. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Tori. Shout out to Willow. Shout out to Tora. Shout out to Sam. Shout out to Neon Blue. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Alyssa. Shout out to Jaleel. Shout out to Stacy. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Inaya. Shout out to, oh man, it's going fast. Uzar. Shout out to Nicole. Shout out to Jake. Shout out to Ava. Shout out to Nosa. Shout out to Abirami. Shout out to Lucy. Shout out to Olivia. Let me do that again. Shout out to Olivia. Shout out to Ruby. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. If you want your name shouted out, leave your name in the comments. Thank you for being here. Shout out to Aura. Shout out to Natalie. Shout out to Ukja. Shout out to Kaylee. Thank you for subscribing. Oh my gosh, did I spell your name wrong? Oh yeah, I did. Sorry. Shout out to Kaylee. Shout out to Hansa. Shout out to Martina. Shout out to Regina. Shout out to Enola. Shout out to Hayden. Shout out to Bo. Shout out to Aaliyah. Oh my goodness. Let me do it again. Shout out to Aaliyah. Shout out to Elena. Shout out to Krissa. Shout out to Millie. Shout out to Lacey. Shout out to Bella. Shout out to Aaliyah. Shout out to Artemis. Shout out to Sabhan. Shout out to Emma. Shout out to Ben. Shout out to Misty. Shout out to Rebecca. Shout out to Ellie. Shout out to Yinks. Shout out to Gracie. Shout out to Salish. Shout out to John. Shout out to Vanny. Shout out to Heidi. Shout out to Daisy. Shout out to Mara. Shout out to Celia. Shout out to Monica. Shout out to Scott. Shout out to Eshal. Shout out to Renata. Shout out to Inski. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Ava. Shout out to Anna. Shout out to these people. On to the next one. Leave a like if you like the shout outs. Also write your name if you would like a shout out. Write it again if I end up not seeing it, because the chat goes a little too fast. Thank you for being here. Shout out to Penny. Shout out to Akaza. Shout out to Emily. Shout out to Ermina. Shout out to Claire. Shout out to Ruhi. Shout out to Lachlan. Shout out to Kenzie. Shout out to Joelle. Shout out to Elsie. Shout out to Iya. Shout out to Erin. Shout out to Jolene. Shout out to Kiki. Shout out to Molly. Shout out to Bricky. Shout out to Jeezy. Shout out to Enrique. Shout out to Lynn. Shout out to Elif. Shout out to Asa. Shout out to Summer. Shout out to Giselle. Shout out to Brick. Shout out to Cleo. Shout out to Rose. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Jack. Shout out to Marcella. Shout out to Antonella. Shout out to Angel. Shout out to Christian. Shout out to Ajit. Shout out to Boston. Shout out to Summers. Shout out to Stephanie. Shout out to Poncho. Shout out to Leah. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Leanne. Shout out to Aaron. Shout out to Ellie. Shout out to Imogen. Shout out to Aurelia. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. Leave a like if you like these live streams. Also write your name if you want me to shout you out. Shout out to Poppy. Shout out to Lena. Shout out to Jasmine. Shout out to what's going so fast? Agostina. Shout out to Nene. Shout out to Kylie. Shout out to Alexander. Shout out to Vivi. Shout out to Emily Anna. Shout out to Liz. Shout out to Aubrey. Shout out to Briley. Shout out to Yasmin. Shout out to Bali. Shout out to Nessie. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Kensley. Shout out to Juju. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Laura. Shout out to Nelly. Shout out to Annarella. Shout out to Gurnas. Shout out to Thomas. Shout out to Emmy. Shout out to Bexley. Shout out to Raylan. Shout out to Maria. Shout out to Tess. Shout out to Natasha. Shout out to Dia. Shout out to Autumn. Shout out to Madison. Shout out to Glinda. Shout out to Isabel. Shout out to Reese. Shout out to Zara. Shout out to Jennifer. Shout out to Vox. Shout out to Belinda. Shout out to Gumball. Oops. Shout out to Anna. Shout out to Alyssa. Shout out to Tabra. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. give this live stream a like if you are enjoying this live stream and the shout outs. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Leave your name if you want me to shout you out. Shout out to Lola. Shout out to Nadi. Shout out to Alice. Shout out to Cora. Shout out to Monica. Shout out to Malia. Shout out to Ella. Shout out to Dina. Shout out to Kelsey. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Ayat. Shout out to Josie. Shout out to Liliana. Shout out to Minnie. Shout out to Aaliyah. Shout out to Amelia. Shout out to Lauren. Shout out to Yunche. Shout out to Willa. Shout out to Sarah. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Raiden. Shout out to Esperanza. Shout out to Kylie Ann. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Leonie. Shout out to Tabea. Shout out to Fur. Shout out to Leslie. Shout out to He's Young. Shout out to Han. Shout out to Kyle. If I haven't gotten to your name, write your name again. I'm so sorry. The chat goes so fast. Shout out to Victoria, but thank you so much for being here. Shout out to Elena. Shout out to Eben. Shout out to Santiago. Shout out to Janae. Shout out to Ellie. Shout out to Mateo. Shout out to Kalia. Shout out to Amia. Shout out to Fernando. Shout out to Mike. Shout out to Jay. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. Leave a like if you are enjoying the shout outs. Thank you for being here. Shout out to Willow. Shout out to Dema. Shout out to Ali. Shout out to Mina. Shout out to Imogen. Shout out to Annabelle. Shout out to Won Hee. Shout out to Tatiana. Shout out to Maria. Shout out to Elizabeth. Shout out to Mia. Shout out to Manha. Shout out to Karen. Shout out to Adele. Shout out to Ellie. Shout out to Baki. Shout out to Maja. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to London. Shout out to Zoe. Shout out to Dixie. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Jasmine. Shout out to Cute Princess Peach. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Enya. Shout out to Talia. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Sarah. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for Kira. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Amelia. Shout out to Daniela. Shout out to Eslina. Shout out to Raylyn. Shout out to Leah. Shout out to Ivana. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Remy. Shout out to Aurora. Shout out to Melanie. Shout out to Malia. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Sean. Shout out to Ramir. Shout out to Brianna. Shout out to Simis. Shout out to Julia. Shout out to Hazel. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. Leave a like if you like the shout outs. Thank you for being here. Shout out to Charlie. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Kalani. Shout out to Aisha. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Coco the puppy. Shout out to Iola. Iola or Lola? Oops. Lola. Shout out to Devin. Shout out to Lucia. Shout out to Michaela. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Lena. Shout out to Marlon. Shout out to Arabella. Shout out to Shania. Shout out to Chase. Shout out to Eslina and Dennis. Shout out to Giovanna. Shout out to Juliet. Shout out to Faith. Shout out to Goshi. Shout out to Savannah. Shout out to Isaiah. Shout out to Tara, or Tara, sorry. Shout out to Kaylee. Shout out to Ima. Shout out to Candy. Shout out to Florence. Shout out to Junior. Shout out to Amanda. Shout out to Susie. Shout out to Isos. Shout out to Marlon. Shout out to Bailey. Shout out to Nyla. Shout out to Mina. Shout out to Sienna. Shout out to Andrine. Shout out to Addison. Shout out to Chucky. Shout out to Vika. Shout out to Ken. Okay, shout out to these people. On to the next page. Give it a like if you like the shout outs. Also write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Thank you for being here. Shout out to Fifon. Shout out to Carmen. Shout out to Aymara. Shout out to Sana. Shout out to Vika. Shout out to Kevin. Shout out to Elizabeth. Shout out to Tegan. Shout out to Gabby. Shout out to Mila. Shout out to Myra. Shout out to Rohan. Shout out to Emmett. Shout out to Hazel. Shout out to Quillian. Shout out to Noor. Shout out to Devry. Shout out to Safia. Shout out to Sammy. Shout out to Taylor. Shout out to Amina. Leave a like if you like the shout outs. Shout out to Kate. Shout out to Isla. Shout out to Shadow. Shout out to Morgan. Shout out to Donna, or Dana, sorry. Shout out to Noemi. Shout out to Bella. Shout out to Alila. Shout out to Eslina. Shout out to Andrea. Shout out to Lilo. Shout out to Appy. Shout out to Kitty. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Tana. Shout out to Cynthia. Shout out to Chewy. Shout out to Hattie. Shout out to Cece and Aubrey. Shout out to Molly. Shout out to Sabun. And shout out to Daphne. Oh. Okay, thank you so much for being here. I will do another shout out today. Okay, so subscribe so you can see when I'm going to do another shout out today. Thank you so much for your time. Take care. Like and subscribe. See you soon.